All right. I am so excited about this special live stream. I'm so special that I forgot to bring my mic down here. I plugged it in and forgot to actually put it in front of me. So let's pretend that didn't just happen. I am so excited about this live stream this morning because I know that we have a very important topic to discuss, and that is the important issue of immigration, because this is something that is being widely discussed across the board right now, and it is something that has caused contention across society, whether it be everywhere from Congress to our own communities. And it is my understanding, that in general, the US has admitted roughly 1 million immigrants per year from around the globe through our thorough application, vetting, and interview process, and with the hopes of trying to accomplish, obviously diversity in our country, being able to offer people a better life, and doing our best to make sure that the process is fair for everybody that has the goal of coming to this beautiful country. However, as we know, this process can be very complicated. And not only that, there is the political rhetoric attached to it between parties that can create a very muddy understanding of what it means to actually migrate to America, what the different processes look like, what the grounds are to deny an application for somebody, and what the policies are that work to benefit American citizens and the people that do want to come here. Over the last few years, I think a lot of us are probably aware that we have seen an unprecedented amount, an unprecedented level of immigration to this country. And it does seem, at least in my view, that maybe some of these processes have been ignored. And now, with the upcoming Trump administration, and he's using words like mass deportation, and then we have the media circulating the idea that maybe the military is going to start coming in and using that as the primary method of sending people back to their homes. People are now rightfully concerned about what that might mean for their family members, or for people who weren't born here, and friends and colleagues and people that they might know that are actually here truly trying to build a better life for themselves, and just really wondering and uncertain about what the future holds. There are so many questions, and in my opinion, the best way to get answers to those questions is to go straight to the source and talk to somebody who is familiar with the system in question. And with that, I would like to bring on Attorney Saman Gonzales, and I hope that I am pronouncing your name correctly. Let me make sure I can hear you. Audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, good. Good morning. Yes, so thank you so much for having me. My name is Saman, like Samantha, actually.
Okay,
without
Saman.
the
Okay.
So
yes.
super easy. So my parents got lazy, left out the THA, so we call it Saman. So thank you so much for having me here, though. I appreciate it.
Of course. Well, I appreciate you being willing to take the time and obviously discuss something that is just probably at the top of people's minds right now. And, it's not something that I am an expert in by any means. And as much as we all have these probably emotional reactions when we see people tossing around different ideas about immigration online, I think, obviously the best thing that we can do is try to answer with a level head, try to address these conversations in the best way that we can, and hopefully bring down the temperature. But before we get started, I would love to hear more about you, just an introduction, who you are, what your background is, where you're at, anything that you think that audience needs to know. And while you're doing that, I'm going to turn off my heater because I was really cold and now I'm starting to get really warm. So just Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes. So my name is Samantha Gonzales. I am an immigration attorney. I have been practicing immigration law now for over 21 years. I'm also an adjunct professor at Nova Southeastern Northwestern University School of Law, where I teach immigration and nationality law. I'm born and bred in Texas. My parents moved to the United States in 1971 on student visas from Iran, and the revolution happened. They stayed. My dad got sponsored through his Texas Department of Transportation, Texas DOT. He was an engineer, and me and my siblings were born here. We have always been around people, friends, and families who have gone through the immigration journey, and I've always been fascinated by that, and really went into law school with the idea of being able to make that impact and be part of the fabric that weaves our country. So it's very exciting for me. I love what I do. And I'm very happy to be able to share this information and answer questions and kind of get a more practical setting. I am located in South Florida, Pembroke Pines. We have a full service immigration law firm. We've been in business now for about 15 years. We have over 50 dedicated professionals that work, help facilitate immigration processes. We do every type of immigration process, pretty much from employment-based, removal defense, family, citizenship, and very high-level complicated immigration matters as well. We speak to thousands of people every year, and we get their stories, and we try to see if we can provide them with legal immigration options and help them through their immigration journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as somebody, just a bit about me, I was actually born in Canada. My dad is from the US, my mom's from Canada. So growing up there, I had dual citizenship.
Okay.
So I now live in Texas. I'm in the US.
Oh, we're in Texas.
Yeah, I'm out just outside of Fort Worth. So
okay, I'm from Arlington.
Oh, okay. Yep, been there many times. Love it here. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun here. But yeah, the immigration process isn't something that has been, unfamiliar to me. My parents moved to Canada. They met in the US in college. They moved to Canada when my brother was, I think, less than a year old. I don't know. And my sister and I were twins. We were born in Canada. So, obviously my dad had to go through some kind of process to go there. And we moved back to the US, and my mom had to go through a process here. So, it's just something that it's always kind of been in the back of my mind. But having dual citizenship, I didn't have to go through a lot of the things that a lot of people do.
Right.
But my mom has. And just with all of these conversations around the immigration process, I'm like, well, I'm not really worried that she's going anywhere. But I know that this is something that it can be a very contentious topic. And as I'm sure, I could be mistaken, but I'm sure the process has gone through several changes, and there's things that make it better, things that make it worse. And I think that maybe starting kind of at the basics of maybe what, different terms are, or maybe what the ideal immigration process looks like from your perspective. I mean, wherever you feel like the best place to start is.
So, in United States immigration law, we have a clear distinction between what we call non-immigrant, which is coming in temporarily to the United States for a specific purpose, versus an immigrant process. And U.S. immigration laws obviously have their own rules, regulations, and boundaries. And it's not necessarily easy for everybody to come to the United States. There are millions of people who just want to be able to have that opportunity to come and work and be able to go back to their country, because it's also not easy to leave your country and just move to another country. But they do recognize that the United States really is the best country in the world, and they have their own ambitions and their own dreams that they want to be able to follow. But we do have strict U.S. immigration laws when it comes to obtaining U.S. immigration benefits. And it's really divided between those two categories, non-immigrant category versus immigrant category. And in immigrant category, which is the category to actually obtain your lawful permanent resident, which is your green card status, those major sponsorships are either through family-based, through employment-based, through an entrepreneurial investment program where you can invest $1 million and get your green card, or you can get it through a humanitarian process, which falls under the refugee asylee, human trafficking, victim of a qualifying crime process. So those are your major categories when it comes to whether or not you can obtain an actual lawful permanent resident immigrant benefit. Then you have non-immigrant benefits, which are worker visas, tourist visas, coming here for a very specific period of time with the intention that you are going back to your country. Student visas, investment visas, these have very strict rules and regulations when it comes to having a purpose to come to the United States and work, or live here. So those are your two primary categories when it comes to an immigration journey of being able to come to the United States.
Okay. So we have kind of this sponsorship category where you're coming with kind of a purpose, whether it be school, whether it be work, things like that. And then we have more of this escaping a particular situation, or, another reason that you might need to come to the US. I mean, that's just kind of my general understanding of what you just said. And all of
Right.
that, that makes sense to me. And I think that makes sense to a lot of people. How have your cases changed? I mean, you've been doing this for 20 years. I feel like when we used to think of perhaps people being here illegally, that would be overstaying that process. And now it seems like maybe we have more people coming and not going through any kind of process. Like, has that changed? Has that increased? Has that decreased? Like, what are you seeing on your end of it?
So the challenges that have really, I guess, exacerbated over the years is as a result of two major, I would say, bodies of laws that came out actually in the 1990s.
Okay.
And when I started practicing, in the early 2000s and even mid 2000s, we really didn't see the impact of those changes because everything is a process. Everything takes a really long time, right? It wasn't until I would say probably the last 10 years or so, or 7 years, that we have really we've really seen a definite impact of those laws that came out in the 1990s. One of the major laws that came out in 1990 was a numerical restriction on family and worker-based green card applications. What does that mean? That means that you are a United States citizen and you want to apply for your sibling. There is a numerical quota by the US government that determines how many sibling petitions, how many people can obtain a benefit through a sibling petition per year. Okay. That number right now, let's say, is 23,000 people. But let's say you have 200,000 people in line for that. So what happens is it creates a backlog. So much so that the government right now is working on cases of sibling petitions that were filed in the year 2007.
Wow.
2007. So you, let's say, you want to sponsor your sister in Canada, and you're going to ask me, okay, attorney, how long is it going to take? And I'm going to tell you, well, we can do it. We can file that petition, but your sister is going to be waiting a minimum of 15 years, to get that benefit.
Okay.
So it has created a backlog so then the answer is, well, why don't they just put more numbers? Okay, go put more numbers. This requires congressional intervention. No president, no law, no policy, no regulation, no random act can change this. This is in the law. This has to go through Congress, and Congress has to open up and put in more visa numbers per category. This applies to children of United States citizens who the child is over 21. This applies to unmarried adult children of United States citizen. This applies to siblings. This applies to even relatives of lawful permanent residences. Basically, these numerical classification quotas apply to every family category except marriage to a United States citizen, child under 21 of a United States citizen, or parent of a United States citizen. Other than that, all the other categories are subjected to what we call visa quotas. So this has created a gigantic backlog, and people don't want to wait.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to wait. So
Right.
if their mom is a US citizen, if your mother is a US citizen and you're over 21 and you're married, it is taking right now 10 years for your mom to apply for you. But if your
Wow.
mom's elderly, she needs to be taken care of, she gets Social Security, she has to live in the US. Are you
Right.
going to go have a caretaker take care of her? Or are you going to come here and violate your status and do what you got to do for your mom? This is a huge issue. Okay, that's one problem. You have the same problem when it comes to worker green card sponsorships. It is taking several years for an employer to sponsor an employee for a green card process. They also have numerical restrictions. And if you're from the countries of India and China, you can expect to wait about, I would say, anywhere. Let's put it this way. If you're from India, they are working on cases filed in 2012.
Wow.
So you're going to be waiting a long time. So you have kids, they go to school, they assimilate, they become parts, they want to further themselves, but they can't because they're stuck in a process that is not going to give them those benefits. So that's one major issue. The second major body of law that came in the 90s that we are seeing now is a law that was passed in 1996 that created a lot of immigration restrictions and consequences for people who did violate their status. And as a result of that 1996 law, came out consequences where people who, if they enter the United States, let's say illegally, they've been in the US for more than 1 year, they travel back to their country, they come back illegally, they will essentially never be able to get their green card in the United States because they have subjected themselves to what's called a permanent bar, which means the only way they can get out of this is if they go back to their home country and they live there for 10 years and apply for a waiver. So the point is that that law came up with a lot of restrictions and consequences. And then the one before that came up with a lot of numerical limitations on who can get certain benefits. So what we have dealt with in the last 10 years are people who did not know about these consequences or did not know the law, or got stuck waiting for petitions to go through, and it has caused a lot of frustration. It has created communities of people who have no legal status in the United States, and for the most part there's no way to get them a benefit other than them having to leave. And they're married to American, they got American kids, they pay taxes with an ITN, they own property, their employer loves them, they have completely assimilated, and there's no legal process for them.
Wow. Sorry, like as you're talking, I now have like 1,000 questions in my head.
That's
but
okay.
Yeah, so I mean, do you feel like the kind of the backlog started, I believe you said around maybe 2007? I mean, before that, do you feel like it was relatively manageable?
Yes, it was manageable. Yes. I think before that, it definitely was manageable. You would say, okay, it's going to take like 3 years or 2 years or 5 years, or there was a point where you would, and then it started growing, and sibling petitions now are taking 7 years. 10 years it's taking. Okay. Now we're at 13 years. Okay. 15 years. Like, why is this growing? Because what would happen is, the numbers, the visa bulletin would stay on a particular date because they had to work through all the applications that were filed on that date, and they couldn't move up because they had to get rid of cases little by little by little, but they are capped on how many benefits they can give, because the Department of State says, well, you can only give 23,000 visas a year. And interestingly enough, it doesn't even include the 23,000 doesn't also include, for example, just that person. It includes, well, actually, let me take that back. Brothers and sisters is 65,000, but 23 is married sons and daughters of USC. But the point is that it also includes their spouse and their kids. So you have a family of 5 that's taking all.
Would that be considered 5 different applications?
Yes.
Oof. Yeah, I can see how that might cause a bit of a problem. Was there anything in particular that caused this backlog to start compiling? Was it a policy change, or was it just an increased number of people submitting applications?
It was just an increased number. It was just the growth and development and population growth that has occurred in the United States.
Okay.
It wasn't anything. I wouldn't say that there wasn't anything particular that initiated it. No.
Right. It was just more people got really excited to come to the US, and which I can understand. I mean, I came here in 1999 and I've been here since then. So I can understand the appeal, but I get that that's probably going to make things challenging on your end. I think, there's so many different terms that people use, and you've kind of gone over a little bit. One of the biggest ones is asylum-seeker. What exactly does that mean? What's the process for seeking asylum? How has that changed? Because I know we've had different periods where, they can apply from the country that they live in versus coming here and perhaps getting some kind of temporary status and waiting for the result of that application. I mean, and that's just one of the most common topics that people discuss. Maybe go over that with us.
Yes, absolutely. So, in U.S. immigration law, we follow what's called the Refugee Act of 1980. And this also works with the United Nations. You cannot file for asylum in the United States if your physical body is not in the U.S. If you are seeking refugee from your country outside of the U.S., then you are called a refugee. And you have to go to the United Nations, and you have to apply to the United Nations and be interviewed through their process. And through their process in the United Nations, you're allowed to choose like 3 countries, and then those countries vet you. And then from there, you're determined whether or not you're going to go to, let's say, Sweden, or you're going to go to Denmark, or you're going to come to the US. And then you come to the United States as a refugee. When you come to the US as a refugee, you get certain government benefits, you get certain government assistance. And after 1 year and 1 day, you are eligible to apply for your lawful permanent resident status. You have already been vetted. You have already been shown that you are going to face persecution or fear of past persecution in your country. So those people who come in as a refugee, in a lot of ways, are already settled because they have gone through the process in their country. Now, it's a lot easier said than the actual process of it. People can wait years in refugee camps. Years waiting to be interviewed, years waiting to go through the process. This isn't like you go in and you just ask for it and you get it. The people there there are hundreds of thousands of people in different situations all over the world. And there's only certain places you can go and ask for the refugee too, where the United Nations is set up that allows you to do that. Okay, so that's the refugee process. Okay, then you have the asylum process. That is for somebody who is physically in the United States and they are completing an application for protection in the United States and seeking that asylum. That's why you see the terms, for example, asylum-seeker. They are trying to get an asylum status in the US. Now, legally, you have 1 year to apply for asylum from your date of entry, and you have to meet a certain type of classification. You have to be able to demonstrate that you are either going to face future persecution or past persecution based on either religion, nationality, political opinion, particular social group, or ethnicity. And you have to develop that connection, what we call that nexus, between being in that category versus that persecution that either has already happened or that may happen.
Mm-hmm.
When you apply for asylum in the United States, if your application is pending for more than 180 days, 6 months, you're eligible to apply for a work permit. Okay. If you do what is called an affirmative asylum, means you're applying directly with USCIS, you are going to be interviewed specifically by an asylum officer. These are highly trained immigration office officials that have been trained just to discuss asylum matters with the applicant to make sure that this applicant fits the legal requirement. The reality is that yes, asylum seeking and the asylum process in the United States has been abused. It has been taken advantage of. There are people who file what we call frivolous asylum cases in order to generate a work permit. This is because when the asylum application goes on, there is not a human there seeing if they meet all the elements. There's just a human there processing the application. And over the years, there have been an influx of asylum applications, so much so that we have hundreds of thousands of asylum cases that are currently pending. We only have 11 asylum offices in the entire country that processes asylum applications. This has created a massive backlog to the point where I have asylum applications that I filed in 2012 that are still pending.
Wow. I
Now,
had no idea that there were only 11 offices. That's insane.
yes. And when you
Considering the number of people that we keep hearing are applying for asylum,
Mhm.
it seems impossible that they'd be able to process that many.
So you're right. So now what happened to this? So I would say back in 2017, what really created the backlog was the influx of Venezuelans that came in with what happened in Venezuela, with the basically destruction of the government. USCIS that year accepted over 500,000 asylum applications. And they changed the process to something called last in, first out. No, first in, last out. I always forget it, but basically, you file the asylum, and they're trying to streamline you out. And then the older cases are the cases that are waiting. Okay, but the problem is that first of all, too many of them came, so it doesn't even that process doesn't even work. Second of all, the longer you wait, the less fear you're going to have. Because how can you demonstrate that your asylum case of waiting of 12 years still carries the same weight as when you filed it 12 years ago?
Right.
So in the meantime, what happens? You either brought kids in when you were younger, so they've been going to school and they're probably excelling at school because, that mentality of do good, do good, do good. This is what happens. You have the issue that you buy a house, you have a good job, you work your butt off, you're in this asylum pending status. Then you go to your asylum interview and the officer is like, but the fear is not there anymore. They cannot approve your case. So then you get referred to court. And then that's when you get into deportation.
Okay.
And if you don't have any other relief, you cannot stay here just because you've been here that long. You cannot stay here just because your kid is doing good in school. You cannot stay here because your boss wrote you an employment letter. You need to have a immigrant foundational basis to stay here. And if you don't have it, you're going to be ordered deported.
Wow. That's actually really interesting. I mean, because like I said, asylum seeking is just something that a lot of people talk about. But so would it be in people's best interest, like once they apply for that asylum you said they have to wait a year and a day to go?
Once they apply for that asylum, they have to wait 6 months to get the
6
work
months.
permit.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it would be best for them to get further in the process as quickly as they can. Do you find that people are kind of hoping to ride that asylum case and just get themselves established and then they won't be deported?
That's a good question because, I personally, I am very thorough with my consultations and I really do speak about the realities of this, but people are desperate
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them are thinking of the now
Right.
and they are hopeful and they're willing to take that risk.
Okay.
There isn't anything else they can do.
Right.
Their alternative is to withdraw it and go back to their country. As long as they know that there is a high probability that they're not going to get it and that this is what their situation is, they're waiting to see if something will pass in the law. They're waiting to see if a major change circumstance happen. They're waiting to take their risk. For them, the risk is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that after 10, 15 years, you may have no choice but to go back. But then I speak to the people who did go through the asylum case, who do have the order of deportations, who didn't go back, and they just live amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
And that can bring you into maybe discussing who is going to be targeted for these quote unquote mass deportations.
Right.
Because it is not U.S. citizens. It is not law-abiding, lawful permanent residences. People are not going to have their citizenships stripped from them.
Right.
It's going to be people who have unexecuted removal orders. Means you have gone through the process. The asylum officer said no. The judge said no, and you didn't leave.
Right.
Those are the people who are going to be targeted.
Right. And I mean, it's obviously, and I'm coming at this from somebody who just listens to the public conversation about this, listens to what's being said on social media. So this is my understanding of it. But it's hard because obviously, we have compassion for people as human beings. Like, I understand if you have come here, whether, you had a legitimate reason for seeking asylum in the first place, and then you've just overstayed and you've built your life and, you've really established yourself here. But then, I have compassion for that. Absolutely. Like, that's a very challenging situation. And ultimately, like, being in that position, I would obviously hope and pray that there would be somebody that would take pity on my case and make a way for me to stay here. But compassion doesn't always dictate our laws. And there's the legal side of it and there's the reality of it. And that says, if we haven't established, your residency here, your citizenship here, if there hasn't been anything further than that initial step, there are serious consequences that are very unfortunate. And I think it's just really unfortunate that when we start talking about deportations, that people automatically assume it's from a place of callousness or we don't care, we just want to kick people out. And that's not the case at all. But when you're also talking about this massive backlog of people that have tried to apply through the proper channels of, a work permit or a visa or coming here for student reasons or whatever, and all of these things get muddled together because suddenly we have far too many things that we can't process, then it seems to me that we would be hindering people that are trying to go through the legal channels and then also trying to address people that have been here and didn't leave when they should have and didn't go through the process. So there's just so many different aspects of it. But when it comes to, obviously, I think a lot of people are interested in what's going to happen with these deportations. How does that work? I mean, when we talk about mass deportations, obviously there's a difference between people who have come here. They're committing crimes. I've seen so many stories about these Venezuelan gangs that are, taking over different areas and really wreaking havoc versus somebody who's been here for a while, who has a family, who's living peacefully. And obviously those are two different areas. But who really should be concerned?
Right. So the people who need to be really concerned are people who have serious criminal convictions, and even more so those with outstanding removal orders.
Mhm.
That combination, those are targets. That's a targeted group of people. And as a matter of fact, they've always been a targeted group of people.
Right.
Always. The only reason why you may not hear about it as much as you do is because we have been inundated with the crisis going on in the southern border. And before that, we had COVID. And over the last few years, with the blow up of social media, um, these have been our topic of conversations. But prior to that, and prior to the blow up of social media, these stories were always happening. People have the knock on their door and grabbing the person who has a removal order and crime and deporting them back. People have been picked up from jails after they've served their criminal sentence. ICE has put a detainer on them and sent them back. I mean, that is ICE's job. That is what they do. They are enforcement. They are the police officers of immigration. When you violate immigration laws and you have a removal order from the judge, they're going to tell you, the judge has told you you need to go back. You haven't gone back, I'm going to send you back. That's their job. Okay.
Right.
So this has always been happening, but our attention and our resources have been shifted over to dealing with other major issues that have been happening. So with the rhetoric that has been going on, it's like, okay, now we're going to fund these departments. We're going to fund these resources. We're going to give them these resources so that they can now do more of a massive sweep. And
Mhm.
again, who is the target? The target is going to be people who have no legal authorization to stay, who have gone through a process, and presumably those that have crimes associated. The major question I get is, what about the person who has just been here without status, either an overstay of a visa or somebody who's came through the border and has had a family and has assimilated as much as they can, but there's no path for them to obtain their residency in the US. I can't tell you that those people won't be targets.
Mhm.
I can tell you that they probably won't be targets in the beginning
Yeah.
because we have to prioritize people who do have serious criminal issues. But it is challenging because if you don't have status in the US, you have to understand that there is a risk of this happening. But because we have focused our attention to so many other things, we have become comfortable with it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's the part that I find worrisome, because this should never have been a comfortable situation.
Yeah.
Their job is to enforce. And only because they were doing other things doesn't mean that they're not going to shift their attention back to what they need to do.
Right.
What I get, and I have to tell people, is that if you're a US citizen, you're fine. If you're a resident, you don't have crime, you're fine. Like that, I have to calm people down with a lot. But if you are just here and you don't have status, yes, you should be concerned. Now, with that being said, though, there is a immigration legal process for those people. If they have not gone to see a judge yet, there is a process for them to go see a judge. So it's not like they're going to pick them up and shove them in a plane. If
Mhm.
they've already gone to go see the judge and they have the order and they stayed past the order, then they're going to be picked up and put on a plane.
Okay. Okay. No, and that all makes sense. And I love the point that you're making, that, being concerned about being deported is not a new thing. If you haven't gone through the process, if you've overstayed your visa, if you have a particular order and you haven't adhered to it, I mean, this isn't new. And so I guess that's why a lot of times I don't appreciate the hyperbolic, the fear mongering and the scare tactics that are put out there, especially by the media. And I'm sure, and I mean, I don't mean to speak for you, but perhaps this does impact your field and your job in some ways when you're trying to quell people's emotions and be like, this is what this process actually is. This isn't new. This isn't a political thing. This is a matter of law. And so that does make it very, very challenging. So, I mean, aside from, the criminals and the gangs and all that, I mean, I think for me, just politically, like, it's fair to just say, go home. Your government needs to deal with you. But I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But as for the people that might have a different status, I mean, what does that process look like? I mean, do they literally have people showing up at their door, knocking on the door, saying, get out of here? Or, I mean, what should they expect if they do have any reason for concern? And maybe you've already touched on this, but maybe there's like a few more details. And I also want to let people know in the comments, we'll get towards some of the questions at the end, and perhaps Saman can address those. So I just want to let people know. But what does that look like if someone has perhaps reason to believe that someone might show up and tell them to leave the country? Is there a process?
Right. So if you have not gone through the process, okay, so these
Mhm.
are for people who have not gone through the process. Again, prioritizing people who have criminal issues do carry a little bit of a different process with them, because if they are detained, depending on what the crime is, they would be eligible to either request a bond or have to do their immigration hearing while they are detained. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the person who has just, let's say the person who has an F1 student visa and falls out of status because they cannot afford to go to school anymore. This is a common fact pattern. Okay. They have a student visa. They're here to pursue a bachelor's or a master's degree. Super expensive. International schools are super expensive in the US. They know it. They get billions of dollars from foreign money to come in to give their child or their relative a US education. And something happens with their parent back home. They lose their job, they die, they get killed, something happens. The child here has nothing to go back to over there. The child here doesn't meet the element for an asylum, because the element for asylum is a persecution. It's different between I don't have anything to go back to versus they're going to kill me when I go back home.
Right.
Okay. But in their mind, what are they going to do? Okay. So they fall out of status, and they can't get work authorization on a student visa. So they never even had that. A lot of times they're going to try to find a job to work unauthorized. They're going to see who can hire them under the table and see what they can get. Now, have I had incidences where immigration has specifically gone after those type of students and detained them? Absolutely. Yes, I have. I have had it where immigration officer, even one time, the lady, she was from Brazil. She was living in an apartment building, and the apartment person downstairs told her that they had a gift for her. She came down, and ICE got her when she was in the lobby and detained her. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And then take her to the detention center. She's going to go in front of a judge. The judge will decide, should I bond her out? Because if I bond her out, what is going to happen to her? She has nothing legally to continue to stay in the US. I just release her. How do I know she's going to come to the hearings? How do I know she's not going to go out there and hide among the people? What is going to happen with her? You understand? So they have to make that determination. She's not a criminal, but she may be a flight risk by the nature of the facts of her case, because she wants to stay here. And if the judge goes ahead and grants her bond, she's going to have to come up with something to try to allow her to stay here. But if she doesn't have anything to allow her to stay here in her next hearing, the judge is not going to have any choice but to order her deported. If the judge denies her the bond and she stays detained, then the judge is going to say, what is going to be able to legally allow you to stay here?
Right.
And if there isn't anything that's going to be legally allowed, he's going to either say, okay, you can either buy your own plane ticket and I'll give you a voluntary departure order, or we'll pay for your ticket, we'll put you on the plane and we'll give you a deportation order. So that's how that process works. It is very case specific. It's very fact specific. I just don't necessarily believe that right now those people are the priority. I think, again, going back to resources and the fact that we have so many other people here, but it doesn't mean that they are in the clear. It doesn't mean that this won't or can't happen to them. Right. And if it does happen to them, then they will have an opportunity to go in front of a judge. But what are you going to ask for then? You need a way of relief. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You can't just stay here because you want to stay here. Right. Like, I get it. Trust me. But I have to tell you what's going to legally allow you to stay here or not.
Right. Right. Having a sustained life, having built a life here is not a legal standing. Is basically the theme of that conversation. I know that politics has a lot to do with this conversation. And as you've been in the field for a long time, I mean, just blatant honesty, what changes have you seen between the last couple of administrations? And I mean, there are things, and just to backtrack a little bit, I came across your account because I saw you kind of talking to people like, calm down. So I can see that you probably see a lot of the same messages that I see online, a lot of the things that people talk about, whether it be, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, between the administrations, especially over the last couple of years. What are the biggest changes that you've seen? And what do you think it could be under the Trump administration, could be under the Biden administration? What are the biggest changes that you've seen that have maybe been a positive thing or maybe a negative thing? And how is that going to affect things going forward? And I know that's very general, but just in the best way that you can maybe answer that question. So,
I actually worked as a legal assistant started in 1998. So before I went to law school, and, things were very, very different. The restrictions of laws when it comes to immigration were not the same as they were now. Then we transitioned over to 9/11, and under that administration, there was a lot of rhetoric against people from the Middle East. We had a special registration process called INSEERS, where if you were from the Middle East or Southeast Asia, you had to go and report. It didn't matter it didn't matter what your status was, you had to go and do a reporting system. And a lot of people would report and they would get deported from that. So we cleared out a lot of people from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and we were focusing on restructuring, right? 9/11 happened. You had people who coming to the U.S. who shouldn't have came to the U.S. INS got dissolved in 2003 and then came up with the Department of Homeland Security that falls under USCIS, ICE, and CBP, right? So we dealt through that political restructuring. Then you transitioned over into the Obama administration, where there was a lot of enforcement. A lot of people got deported under Obama administration. A lot of criminals got deported under Obama administration. He was very systematic of putting in what we call ICE detainers of people who had committed crimes. ICE would come, pick them up, and literally just deport them. That's what he did. And he did it very effectively. Okay.
Yeah, so this is not new.
No, this is not new. And at the same token, he tried and he recognized that we were having this broken system. And I use the word broken because the laws that had occurred in 1996, we were now seeing them We were now seeing the result of it under his administration.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So this is when he came up with DACA. This is when he came up with DAPA, which is actually deferred action parents. For parents, they were going to be able to get it. DAPA got shut down from the court. It never came into fruition. DACA evolved and was able, because they were the protected class of children. Okay.
Right.
So he recognized that there needed to be something done, but very contentious with Congress, right? He did not control Congress. He got one thing done, Obamacare. Other than that, everything failed with him because, he was Democrat and they were Republican. And then from there, of course, you move into the first Trump administration, where we have massive travel bans, we have massive restrictions, we have a lot of political, policies in place to just prevent immigration. But then a year and a half later, COVID. And so from there, we have Title 42, which says you can't come to this country if you're coming from a country that has a high communicable disease, because Title 42 comes from the Department of Health and Human Services. It doesn't come from immigration.
Right.
And then from there, we have this administration, which has really just allowed millions of people to come through the southern border. And there is no denying that. They have came hundreds of thousands of people. I see their documents. I talk to them. I ask them, what was your journey? How did you come? Who did you speak to? Why did you come? And it's a lot. It's a lot of people that have been able to come. And you have these groups, and then you have the other groups who have been waiting outside in their country, and they are pissed off. Why am I waiting outside to be with my 80-year-old mother for the last 7 years? But then you have somebody else who literally just came. Now, keep in mind, the people who have came, just because they have came doesn't mean there is a path for a green card for them. That's a whole other process and a whole other journey, because a lot of people who have came have no path for residency. And that is hard to explain to somebody, because they're like, but they let me in. I go, I know they let you in, but you don't meet any qualifications to get any benefits past them letting you in.
Yeah. Right.
So what are we going to do?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. You don't have all the answers? Yeah, no. And I think that's the hardest thing. And I think it really has done a disservice to a lot of people there's a process in place for a reason. There's laws in place for a reason. And when you go through the process, you have those laws, at least in my understanding, explained to you. But when you just come across the border and you set up shop here, you get an apartment, whatever it is, you don't go through that process, and you don't understand how complicated it is, and you don't understand what your options are. And I'm not saying, this is a lack of intelligence or anything like that. It's just the fact that you've bypassed so many steps, and now you're here, and it's like, okay, but we still have to go back to like step 1 and 2. And that might mean that you have to go back to your country and start that process all over again.
I have told people to go back to I have had people who have come to me through the southern border and had them go back to their country.
Is that what you tell people?
Yeah, like, absolutely.
Just go back and
I said, go back and do it the other way. Yes. I've had people from Peru, Dominican Republic, Jamaica. They've gone back to their country. Yes.
Yeah.
I tell them, I said, listen, there is no way for you. You need to start all of this all over again. You have to do it through A, B, and C. And if you continue to stay here, you will continue to not get a benefit. You will continue to have challenges, and I break it all down for them, and they go back.
Yeah. And and a lot of respect to those people. And I truly believe there's a lot of I know that there are a lot of really good people that come here. And, I, in my heart of hearts, I don't want to send them back. Like, I want them to be I want people to be able to set up shop, to stay, to establish their life, to accomplish the thing that they want to accomplish. But that process is so incredibly important. And I think regardless of why you came here or how long you've been here, I think a lot of people understand that fairness and understand that they're like, if I want the best shot for myself and for my family, I do need to go through that process. And I really appreciate those that are willing to accept that. How do we convey that message to people? Because obviously this is just a very contentious topic, and I don't want to come across as heartless when I'm like, you know what, you just need to go home and do things the right way. But I mean, is there a way to kind of engage in that? And I mean, it's just kind of a harsh reality maybe, but
It is. And, I guess for me and my perspective is that I want to understand what, I always ask in my consults, like, what's your goal? What do you want? What I want to help you get to that goal. But if that means that you have to do things another way than what you thought, well, that's also why you're here talking to me, because I'm here to help you get to there. But you have to listen to what I'm saying, because I'm trying to set you up for success,
right.
not set you up for failure and file something that you don't qualify for or put you in a bad situation. I always tell them, I'm never here to put you in a bad situation. I'm here to help you. But unfortunately, the steps that you have taken have not been in your best interest to help you. Now, this isn't for everybody, right? But these are for people who really either saw an opportunity to try to come to the US to get a better life, which I totally understand and sympathize with, but there is a process in place, and there are these immigration laws in place, and there isn't anything that's going to allow these people to necessarily bypass it. Now, at the same token, you have hundreds of thousands of people who will not go back to their country, and they're going to stay here. They spent everything that they had to get out of their situation. They sold everything that they had. They saved everything that they had to make that journey to come from where they came from, to go through Mexico. And now they're here, and they are going to do everything that they can to build their life over here. And yes, that is commendable, and the work ethic and the determination is, but how do we do it in a way where you have safety and security? How do we do it in a way that you don't have to be worried if immigration's going to come and pick you up? And if the laws just don't exist for that, it's my job to tell them that and work with them on seeing what can be done. But I have to be very real with them.
Right.
On what their situation is.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the talking points that I hear a lot as well is that the people that are here, we should just create a law that allows them to stay. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So there are laws, we have what's called registry laws. There's the registry amnesty law that happened the last time the registry came out was actually in 1972. We have not had a registry since then. The next amnesty program that came out was under President Reagan, 1986, that he gave amnesty to people who had been in the U.S. since 1982. That is probably our last documented legal amnesty program that was passed thoroughly through Congress and gave people benefits. So now we are from 1986, we're 38 years into it. Yes, so the pushback on the amnesty is that they do not want to create a precedent that a person can come here and violate the immigration laws and then walk away with a green card.
Right.
And that is their argument for people who are against it. We don't want to do that. And if that means that you as an undocumented have to continue to stay here and suffer, if you will, then they put that on that person, which is heartbreaking. And, again, you get into topics of, is this fair or not fair? And I see it, trust me, so many stories. But how can we facilitate this person through a legal pathway? And it's very challenging. It's very,
Right.
very challenging.
Right. Obviously. I mean, we it's a nice idea to just say, let's just create that path for them to stay here. I mean, that sounds ultimately like the compassionate thing to do. But the bottom line is that they did bypass that process. And do we reward that? Do we just say, well, since you're here, you came over the border, let's just make it easy for you to stay here? And again, that just sounds so callous coming out of my mouth, but at the same time, like, that's the reality of the situation. And especially for those of you that work in this field, like, you didn't create this problem. Like, you didn't create this situation, but now you're on the front lines having to deal with it and be real with people. So, obviously, perhaps people are going to think that that's heartless and callous, but it's just not. And if we were hypothetically to allow these millions of people that have come here over the border illegally to stay here, what does that mean for the people that are applying the proper way? Because as I said, we typically, before kind of a bigger mess was created, admitted probably about 1 million legal immigrants per year, maybe that number, give or take. Does that mean that we just kind of step back for the next 10 years because we've gotten 10 years worth of immigrants here and we've got to find resources to accommodate them? We've got to create a market. We've got to have jobs. What does that mean for pushing that process back for all of these people that are waiting? So, I mean, in my eyes, that just creates a bigger mess. Am I right in that?
Yeah. So the million people who are allowed, who are authorized as to come and get their residency, like you had discussed in the beginning, those are people that fall into that immigrant category that I talked about in the beginning. Those are the people who are coming through the family-based or employment-based processes. So I don't foresee necessarily that those specific processes change so much as how are we going to address the visa quota backlog. So it's coming at us in multiple arenas. You understand? You want to give amnesty and help out people who are already here. Do you want to also relieve the backlog? Do you also want to, change the laws? Do you want, like, how are we going to do what we call now a comprehensive immigration reform in this country? Because the laws are super antiquated. I mean, if I tell you that even to do a green card employment sponsorship, the employer has to run an ad in a paper newspaper. That is the requirement. Just like little, like, things are old, like they're outdated. They're not up with the technology. They're not up with the processes of what the actual day-to-day reality is. It's like, and I always tell people, there's like real world and then there's immigration world. We got to do what's according to immigration world, and that's how you'll be successful. So
yeah, and that makes sense. And maybe I could argue that it might be challenging to address some of these other things and making the process more streamlined and up to date when so many other problems are being created in other areas. It's like all of our energy is having to be focused on addressing, an increase in number of people that are here. And, that could be the situation. I know that we're going on an hour. I don't want to keep you all morning. I could talk about this all day. I do have a couple of questions in the comments, I think. If you want to answer maybe just a couple.
sure.
Arma,
I don't see
sorry, I've got
were you
the
putting
chat
it
over
there?
here.
Okay.
Yeah, Arma 15 says, how does TPS differ from the regular asylum claims? Maybe that's something you answered earlier.
Sure.
But
So temporary protected status is a congressional mandate that gives status to people from selected countries. Right now, there are 20 countries on the list, I believe. As a matter of fact, if you give me 1 second, I can pull up my TPS country list. Right now, people who are on TPS are from Afghanistan, Burma, Cameroon, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Haiti, Honduras, Nepal, Nicaragua, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, Yemen, and they just added Lebanon to this list. So TPS are for people from countries that are experiencing war-torn situations, famine, earthquake, natural disasters, and a civil war. We are allowed to give them this status. It is an actual status that they get. They get work authorization, they get travel authorization, and they can live in the US. It is approved in 18-month increments where the Department of State does reports on these countries, presents it to the government and says, okay, for example, this country is still not good enough to not be on the list anymore.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the people who are from this country stay on TPS. It is not a pathway to green card. Okay. It is ideally supposed to be temporary. But what do we have here? We have the country, for example, of El Salvador, who has been on TPS since March 9th of 2001.
Wow.
Is a country supposed to be on TPS since 2001? Can you imagine you have built your life and lived in the United States for 23 plus years, and then they say that is not temporary?
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't even make any sense. But then you have a country like Haiti, for example, where a lot of problems in Haiti. I mean, they just shot an airplane the other day. You can't even fly into Haiti anymore right now. And then Haiti's been on the TPS list since 2010, since the massive earthquake that they had that killed 250,000 people. Then you have Lebanon, who just got joined on the TPS list because there's a war going on over there. So, you know, it's very country specific. Asylum-Seeker is just a person who is trying to seek refugee in the United States based on one of those 5 categories that I mentioned.
Okay. No, and that makes sense. And I mean, this kind of, and like I said, I won't keep you too much longer. Like I could have a million questions about this whole topic, but I really do appreciate your time.
Sure.
We did see all of this controversy with several thousand Haitians living in Springfield, Ohio, and then granted this temporary protected status. How does that work as far as like, how does that kind of hinder your job, like, or the deportation process in general, if someone is granted, or, you know, a community of people are granted that status? Like, are they actually protected and are exempt from deportations? How
They
does that
are.
work?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
You can have a, yes, you can even have a removal order and be legal in the US with TPS.
Okay.
TPS, if you have a deportation order. So, you know, I'm in South Florida and I represent a lot of Haitians. And so I'm very familiar with the community and with TPS recipients in them. A lot of them have, you know, they've tried to apply for asylum. They got their asylum denied. They went in front of an immigration judge. They have their asylum denied and they have an order of removal, but they have TPS protection. So they are totally legal. And as a matter of fact, depending on the future facts of their case, if they get married to an American, or if they get a child that's over 21 that is an American, there is even a mechanism to go back, reopen the case, and have them travel on TPS, come back and adjust and give them their green card through that underlying family petition.
Wow. It sounds complicated.
Those are complicated. We do a lot of them because, like I said, we're down here. We have it, but those are good cases.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, we're at about an hour. I know you probably
Sure.
have things to do, but
I
is
do.
there anything else you want to kind of end on? Any other?
I do have a book too that I wrote.
Oh, yay.
So you guys can check it out on Amazon. It's actually free on Kindle. It's called Rise and Grind: My Journey to Becoming a Successful Immigration Attorney. So
Oh, I love that.
I just talk a little bit about my history of me, my family growing up, why I chose to do immigration, the challenges that I faced also getting into that position, and where my experience has laid itself down and stuff. So definitely you can check it out. And I ask everybody if they can follow me also on TikTok and Instagram, immigration_attorney_Samantha. And if you guys ever want to check out my website, also www.us-ioc.com. And yeah, if you need anything else, just let me know. But thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it.
Of course, you've answered a lot of very important questions, and I will get those links from you and I will put them in the description box. I will definitely be looking for your book because I should have asked. I didn't even know you had a book. That's amazing.
Okay.
So, guys, I'm going to put the link in the description box, so go check it out.
Yes, and Blair will send it over to you, so no worries.
Yeah, I will definitely read it, and we'll have to have you back and go over some of the things in there. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck with this whole process, and I'm sure as things evolve, we're going to have more questions.
Definitely. You take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good
You're
one.
welcome. You too.
Bye.